don't know about you, but I find it very easy to identify myself with that story. Also in the Mahabharata, Vyasa tells us, Yato dharma tato jaya. Where there is right action, there is victory. Maybe that victory is not today, is not tomorrow, but that victory is inevitable. It will come. Things in the Mahabharata didn't go so well for the Pandavas for a long time. And then the tide of battle turned because they kept doing the right thing. Dharma is duty, but not any duty. Dharma is that action which leads to our self-realization. It's our highest duty. And Sri Krishna says, when a lower duty is in conflict with a higher duty, that lower duty ceases to be a duty. We must follow that higher duty. And we all have many duties, but sometimes it can get confusing. Which is that higher duty? Which is our true Dharma? I like the Gilbert and Sullivan operetta, Pirates of Penzance. And the main character is called a slave of duty. And if I recall the story correctly, as a boy, his dying parents give him in the hands of his nanny. And they tell the nanny to apprentice the boy to a pilot who guides a big ship into a harbor. But the nanny misheard. She thought they said, apprentice the boy to a pirate. So she finds a pirate, gives him the boy, and the boy learns everything about how to be a good pirate. And then even when the boy learns the truth about pilot and pirate, he says, but my apprenticeship to the pirate, I know being a pirate is not a good thing, but my apprenticeship isn't over yet. I'm duty bound to be a pirate. And I think I have identified with that feeling of being a slave to duty in my life also. I was without a father at age 7, and my mother had to work and raise 4 children. And I was a little envious of my friends who after school would be out playing, and I would be at home doing some chore like helping prepare dinner or cleaning the house. And yet years later, when I didn't have to do those things anymore, still I kept doing them out of the sense of duty. And once years later, after I joined Ananda, there was one moment I remember when I was conflicted by this higher and lower duty. And I had committed myself to doing a project with several friends, and then the friends, their interests changed. They were no longer on the spiritual path. This project we were doing was just not so important to them anymore. And yet I continued because I gave my word. And yet I was becoming unhappy. I was becoming out of tune. I felt it to be a burden. And everyone else knew that I needed to be doing something else. But somehow I didn't. And I asked Swamiji finally, what I should do. He never told me, but he gave me the tools that I needed to make the decision myself. He wrote me a letter and asked me just 3 or 4 questions, like, what's the most important thing to you spiritually? Where are your deepest loyalties? Is it to the spiritual path? Is it to Ananda? Is it to this project? And what about your friends? Where are their loyalties? Is it to this project? Are their loyalties to you? Is it to the spiritual path? Or are their loyalties somewhere else? And through needing to sit down and be still and ask myself these deep questions, I was able to focus, and the answers became very clear. And so it is when we're uncertain about what path to take, if we're able to be still, focus, ask those deep questions of ourselves, and the answers become clearer. I'm reading right now the book of K.P. Singh, the chairman of DLF. And he talks about right action in business being a deal where everyone is benefited. It's a win-win situation for both parties. And he tells the story of building the DLF headquarters here in Delhi. And he said they had to demolish an old building that was their offices and then rebuild it and then build a new one. And they had to ask several tenants to leave the building, the old one. And they gave them lots of notice. They found other housing for these people. But one lady was very afraid, and she just refused every offer. And finally, the police came with a court order to evict her. And when Mr. Singh heard about this, he went down and asked the police to go away. And he said that we can never build something positive on this foundation of disharmony. And he went to visit the lady. And she said, I know why you've come, is to tell me to leave. And he said, no, as a matter of fact, my brother-in-law who visited you, he said, you make a great cup of coffee. I wonder if you'd make a cup for me. And he started to visit her frequently. They'd have a cup of coffee, they'd chat about this and that, but never about her needing to leave. And she became genuinely friendly. He said that they remained lifelong friends. And after a few months, she came to him and she said, I've decided that I'm going to move out. I don't want to inconvenience you anymore. And so it's like it was much more important to build that friendship, to create harmony, than it was to simply build a building. And there's another aspect to this right action, and that is sometimes we feel there's a conflict between higher and lower duty when really there is no conflict. Perhaps most of the time our Dharma is sitting right in front of us, facing us. Yoganandaji told Swami Kriyananda that his life was one of intense activity and meditation. And Swamiji, he said for years, he struggled with these two duties. And he felt that if he could just be a hermit in the Himalayas, meditate 12 hours a day, read spiritual books, that was his true calling. He would just feel completely content doing that. That surely was his higher Dharma. And then once, years later in the founding of Ananda Village, there was a time when there was a financial crisis, and he had to work very, very hard to earn the money single-handedly to save the project and get out of that financial crisis. He succeeded, he earned the money, but then he said the real benefit was not the money, it was not the fact that he succeeded. The real benefit was spiritual, because he felt that it was through this action that he grew stronger spiritually. That was the whole purpose of the activity. And then he could see that there was no higher or lower dharma in that situation. It was for him to be active in the situation that he was placed in, to do what was needed in that situation, to act appropriately. And when we do everything for God, then there's no question of higher or lower duty, because we do it all for him. In the Gita, especially when Sri Krishna talks about the yogas, he gives us rule after rule about how best to live the spiritual life. And yet, at the end, in the 18th chapter, it's as if he throws all of those rules away. And he says, love is the highest rule. You know, if you can love completely, then there's no need for these lesser rules. There's the story of the saintly girl who she worshipped Lord Krishna as her bridegroom. And she would take a garland, she would place it first on herself, then she'd place it on the Murti of Krishna. And her father saw her and got angry that she put the garland on herself. But where there is pure intention, there's no need for the rules. Love becomes our highest duty. Love becomes our highest dharma. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I will also share a few thoughts, and exactly from where Keshuaji left off, he talked about love. And also in the reading that Surina read, Swami talks about restless preoccupation versus complete absorption in an activity. And that is what Swami said, just a secret for right action. In some ways it is very easy, just that it is. Restless preoccupation versus peaceful absorption in the activity. And as Keshuaji mentioned, peaceful absorption, there are a few things that we can do in our lives where we are entirely absorbed. And that comes when our heart longs for it. You know, it could be as trivial as watching a movie that we really, really like, but we are absorbed in that. Can we use or can we have a similar kind of absorption in other activities? And that's why Krishna says if you learn that act, the other rules could be just obviated entirely. Just a funny story. I was watching a movie again. Just a disclaimer, this is not a spiritual movie by any means, but there is something that is funny, so I would like to share. It's called The Intern, and it is about a very old person, like around in 70s, I think. He goes for an internship to a very new company, a fresh company, where most of the employees are like in their late 20s, including the CEO. Okay, but they just thought, as a good gesture, being a good citizens of the country, they should basically do something to the service. So this guy, gentleman, 70-year-old, goes for an interview. Now all those who are interviewing, they're also in their 20s, you see, and they're expecting to interview 20-year-olds. So all their questions are also like that, you know. Again, so we all probably have been in our 20s. I don't see anyone who is there now, so I can just make a little fun of them. But yeah, I mean, there is a lot of fire when we look at them. You know? So their questions are also oriented towards that. So there is this guy, and the elderly gentleman is right in front of him, and he asks, so, what is your goal for the next 2 years? He says, oh, well, probably that's not a question relevant to you. And then I guess, okay, let's go to the next question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And again, oh, okay, maybe this is also not a question relevant to you. And then he goes on and realizes, okay, well, maybe this entire question is not relevant for you. I said, okay, you're selected. And then interview goes off there itself. When I was thinking about this topic, again, I go back to the same thing that Swami was talking about, which is, he says, a peaceful absorption in the moment, in the current activity. Master was adapt to this. No? He is a master because he could understand that, he has understood that absorption, and that's why many times they say we don't only listen to the master's word, we don't only listen to their books or read their books, but we watch them if we get an observe. Because when they are not actually giving any sermons or anything, the rest of the time they are also peacefully absorbed. And so more we observe them, we get to learn. And one of his disciples sort of understood this, so he would observe Master. And one of the saying that Master has given to us is, you have to be peacefully calm, actively calm, thank you, and calmly active all the time. So he has understood it a little bit. So now he is putting Master to test and is observing Master. And one time he finds Master running because Master is late for some meeting. He says, I caught you. I caught you because you're running. The Master says that, no, you didn't catch me. And again, we'll go back to what I've said. I said, like, calmly active, actively calm. You can be running restlessly, or you can be absorbed in that running. But not running when you are learned for a meeting is surely foolishness. And that's what he was again saying. If I ask a question to all of us here, the same thing, where do we see ourselves in 5 years? Maybe some of us who run some business and something, we may be able to answer with some certainty and whatnot. If I expand that, answer in terms of life. We're living, we're part of life. Where do we see ourselves in a few years? Can anybody here answer with absolute conviction and a complete certainty that this is what is going to happen? Probably not. Forget about 5 years. If I ask any of us, okay, next week, let's talk about next week. What is going to happen in our lives? Can we answer the same question with absolute certainty? Is there then anything that we can say is truth with absolute certainty? Think for a moment. Is there anything that we can say which is true for me individually with absolute certainty? And the answer is, don't go give it to your mind yet. The answer to that is yes. And that is the only current moment. If I ask you the question about what is happening now, what is we say, of course we have our perceptions and all those things, but at least for that moment, it is an entirely living truth for us. And we have the capacity to look at it as deeply as we want. Can we be peacefully absorbed then only to that which we actually hold in our hands? By our tendencies, past habits, all our situations surrounding the way it is, we're trained to actually carry our minds, which is just rushing back and forth all the time, which I don't even know it is going to be reality or not. Amount of time. Again, don't get me wrong, I don't mean that the introspection or understanding is something wrong, but there is a place for that. Rest of the time. What is life? Is life living what is going to happen in 5 years? That will become reality when we carry step by step from here to there. That's what, again, go back to what Surinari, he said, peaceful absorption in the current moment. All our teachings, all our practices of Hom Saw, Kriya, help us to stop our tendency of mind going outside and say, be here and now. You can make world of a difference if we stay in the moment. Kriya helps us with that because our minds sometimes are just too unruly, to bring it down to the extent, okay, now I can be here. I can be now. And that's what we practice in our meditation. Master says that's where it begins. And take that absorption that we find in meditation and bring it into your activities. And again, if I ask you to reflect in your own lives, where we find that this absorption is easy, is things which we really like to do. The people who really like their work, they can just continue completely absorbed without a problem. There are people who are artists, they can go and then deep dive into their art. Maybe some of us, we like meditation, at least at times, and we can be completely absorbed in that. Can we take absorption and then apply the same principle in the moment? And as Keshavaji said, what is the missing part is, can we bring our heart into it? Master said that his chants, we have to spiritualize. Of course, there is a power in the chants themselves, because it's not just he chose any of them, he wrote them. But he also demanded we have to do our part, which is spiritualize it ourselves. What that means is basically we choose a chant that we like, and then we play it on and on till we also feel the same thing that Master probably must have done. And that's why many times some of us here are chanters, we look at, oh, that chant doesn't quite work for me. It doesn't mean that chant is bad or anything. I haven't made a connection. But there are few which we somehow all of a sudden resonates. Even we hear, I like that chant. What is that like? Because we have made that personal connection. He said, not only chanting, make that personal connection to every activity that is happening in our world. We have a friend in Gurgaon. She was from Japan. She was a Kriyaban. She is a Kriyaban. She recently moved back to her country. And then one of her friends is a Zen Buddhist monk. And we used to talk about the ceremonies of Buddhism and whatnot. And they have this beautiful ceremony called tea ceremony. So she sent me a video by this guy. He's trying to make it a more publicly available thing. No? Now, how many of you drink tea or coffee? Probably all of us. But when I look at that ceremony, what was the ingredients involved? Water, something to boil the water, and the tea leaves and cups. Is it all familiar? That's how probably we all make tea. But then the action, the way he was doing everything, just made it, I was there. I was watching that video for 3.5 minutes. And if that is how I will make the tea, I think I'll be very interested in making one and serving one and probably drinking one itself. Because he has spiritualized as mundane as an activity of just making the chai into a spiritual experience. Can we do that? Yes. Maybe the way he does it works for some of us. No, we have to find our own way. The second level, we call it the art and science of Raja Yoga. No? Science, we are super good at that. And when it comes to art, and that is Keshavaji was talking about, the love. When we say, okay, art of tea making, we all have. But how that it is going to touch us, each individually, is entirely up to us. When we like something, even like it's a chai, I like the way you make the chai. The two options we have, you just keep going to their home. But if you want to make it a reality on an everyday basis, what do? We ask the recipe. And when we do this, for the activities as much as we can, choose throughout your day many things we do and spiritualize them. In that absorption, a peaceful absorption into those small moments throughout the day, those becomes then the right action, as Swami was saying. Those becomes the truth living for us. And that can bring a very lasting fulfillment as we go forward on this journey. Joy to you.
Please stand, we'll have our artist now.